All right, I gotta be honest with you guys, man. Watching Thanos bully Knull is amazing. Like, it's absolutely amazing. And it's everything that I hoped it would be, right? The idea behind this is that Knull the symbiote got his return, but was basically captured by Hela, and she'd been siphoning his power off. So in the moment, he's in a very weakened state compared to how powerful he traditionally is. Now, one of the things that we also talked about is that if you recall the original King in Black series and the real origin of Knull as it was provided to us, even going so far as to look at Jason Aaron's Gore the God Butcher. When Gore first picked up All Black, the Necro Sword, and it was basically in the hands of a black figure who was there next to a gold figure, and the gold figure had a staff, that's what we're picking up with, right? Of course, as most of you guys know, All Black was created by Knull. It belonged to Knull. The black figure that Gore had taken All Black from was Knull, and so on and so forth. What Knull is doing now is he's hunting for the staff, because it's basically a new source of power. And so that's what's led to Thanos, because now Thanos has arrived on the scene, and Thanos asked the question, right? Do you know what love is? I have loved death with a fire and a passion unmatched by all the collected verses of the universe's most celebrated ballads. I have undertaken impossible quests, laid intricate plans, dreamed great and terrible dreams, because that is who I am. I am the poet. I am the philosopher. I am the grand dreamer whose name conjures the horror of the end across galaxies. I am Thanos, little god. And who exactly are you but a single shrieking note howling through eternity? And I gotta say, man, that's one hell of a way to introduce yourself to someone like Knull, the symbiote god. I mean, just look at this, right? I am a poet. I am a philosopher, right? This reminds me of Denzel Washington from Man on Fire, right? Like Creasy is an artist. His art is murder, and he's about to paint his masterpiece. That's exactly what that reminds me of, right? It's phenomenal the way this is done. More so than that, Thanos just has Knull, right? Just clutching this guy by the neck, and Thanos just says, oh well, points for effort. So he's not even taking him seriously, and he just like throws him aside, and he says, it seems I've misspoken. You rank far below a wild cur-void creature, so howling doesn't enter into the equation. No, you are not but a mewling sheep, and all sheep require a shepherd to help them find their way, and I am here to help you find your way to Knull. And that's the crazy thing, right? Because we've never seen these two meet, and I love the idea that Thanos does not take this guy seriously, that Thanos is dismissive of Knull in every conceivable way, and Knull just tells him, I suppose these are your mangy shepherds then. And he says, no, these outriders are my children, loyal unto death. And he says, yes, death. It wasn't her beauty that earned my love. It was her simplicity, her finality. Death. Death as the true void. No mercy, no sympathy, no sentimentality. And so he's essentially calling Knull a pretender, right? You are not the true void. You were never the true void. Mistress Death is the true void, the one in which I serve, and the one that I truly love. You, my friend, are a pretender, a false idol, a man pretending to be something greater than he actually is. And that's what he tells Knull, right? Death as the true void. No mercy, no sympathy, no sentimentality. I know, I just repeated that. I know we said it before. I feel like that just gets the point across. And he says, except she wore that human face. Even as the skull beneath the skin, she embodied the lives she took. That's what I could not stomach in the end. That empathy. But if I was disappointed in her, I despise you. You are of the void, and yet you have a face that I can punch, bones I can break, a voice that shrieks in pain. Honestly, no, you're not even trying. And that's when Knull just says, I will grant you that one thing, Titan. In all your comings and goings, you certainly cast a long shadow. And that's when Knull manifests himself. And that's when Thanos really starts to understand what it means to fight Knull. Because yes, Thanos is bullying Knull, but bullies always get their due. Because at that point, he says much better, right? And he says, but tell me, Knull, in all this blinding light, where is the darkness for you to exploit? And Knull just looks at him and says, unfortunately for you, the answer to that query can only be found within. and literally manipulates the darkness in Thanos and just explodes out of him and kills Thanos on the spot. In one move, he killed Thanos, the Mad Titan. And that's what it means to fight Knull. That's how capable Knull is. And here's the crazy thing about it. It's only a fraction of his power. He's still not at the peak of his power. And that's the crazy thing. By the end of this, we'll start to see it. We'll start to see how powerful he is actually becoming. Because I'll tell you guys right now, it's a whole new level of ability than what we've seen before. And so that's where Thanos is just laying there, right? And in that moment, Knull goes and grabs the spear. And he says, I must say, Thanos, all things being equal, I much prefer broken bones. And so Thanos just falls over dead. And so Knull addresses all the Outriders, right? And he says, well, and they say, we serve. We all serve. And that's where he asks, do you see, my children? Despite our losses, our family grows. A new void awaits us now. I will seize it, conquer it, control it, and we will become more powerful than ever before. From endless darkness, a cursed burning light. From burning light to cold, merciless revenge. And that is when he takes off. But I gotta say, I mean, just like look at this for a second right now. There is a name for what Knull is right now. He has a name. We're not gonna go into it until we get to the end, because those of you guys who have read Marvel Digital Comics and are familiar with the Venom Digital Comics, you guys already know what's coming. You saw it coming from a mile away as soon as you realized he was going for the staff. But that's where you end up picking up at this orbital space station at Newmort, right? Basically, it's the homeworld of the Badoon, and the Badoon are one of the deadliest races in the entirety of the Marvel Universe. Their weapons crafting is second to none, safe maybe for the dwarves, but that's where you pick up with Hela. Now, Hel is the other half of this equation, because again, while she's been siphoning off the power of Knull, Hela's doing what she always does, right? Domination, control, mad power grabs, different things like that. And that's when she says, a rather odd question to ask at a time like this, I realize. But I must admit, I am growing quite enamored of my new powers. Good, Tyr. And so Tyr just says, that much is clear, Lady Hela. Powers that appear to be increasing with each passing moment. Perhaps your opponent is finally dead. But that's where Hela cuts him off and just says, no, Knull lives yet, though substantially weakened now. I still hear his pathetic lamentations within the hive mind, albeit like a distant echo. And so Tyr just says, for my part, I much favor utter silence over echoes from one so cunning. And so her response, right? Fear not. Knull's ridiculous quest for powers he can neither comprehend nor control will be his ultimate undoing. The entirety of his void powers shall soon belong to me. Now, let's not forget the other half of this equation, because as far as I'm aware, in Marvel Comics, the King in Black mythos is still intact, which is to say, if you guys recall the work of Al Ewing during his Venom run, specifically the post-Donny Cates era of the King in the Black, he had established the idea of the eventuality and his relationship with Knull. The way this worked is that the Beyonders, for example, and the King in Black are kind of opposites to each other. Right? The way it was explained, at least in Venom issue number 17, for example, is that the Beyonders try to keep everything in order and keep structure and keep everything from falling apart by operating on the outside, whereas the Kings in Black operate on the inside. The important thing here, though, was that that role was originally going to go to Knull, and Knull rejected it. And ultimately, I think we ended up learning that it was supposed to go to Eddie anyway, even though it had kind of gone to other people. But Eddie Brock, when he had defeated Knull, the symbiote god, in the original King in Black storyline, and then became the new King in Black, so basically mastering all the symbiotes, we learned that there would come a time, as it has happened with every single version of Venom across the multiverse, where Eddie would eventually join the eventuality. And the eventuality is kind of the living embodiment of any and all symbiotes that have existed across the multiverse, whether they became Venom or any other variation. And what that means is that it's astronomically powerful. Now keep in mind, at the end of Venom War, because of how that story concluded, Eddie Brock has been cut off from the symbiote hive mind, and it almost killed him, hence the reason why he bonded to Carnage. But as far as I'm aware, all that eventuality stuff is still out there. Now, the reason why all that matters is because that's something that Hela is tapping into, whether she knows it or not, whether she recognizes that or not. Now, we may very well end up seeing Marvel coming back and just kind of retconning all that, and that may be one of the purposes that the story serves, or there may be no reference to it at all. Of course, Knull himself returned just because of the fact that Eddie was no longer King in Black, and a King in Black has to always exist, so Knull ended up returning as a result of that. We talked about that in the first video that we did. But the bigger point here is that Hela is tapping into an astronomical level of power, so who knows where she ends up going from here. But again, focusing on this particular moment as she's tormenting this member of the Badoon, and essentially torturing them, where she talks about how they all have generals as well, and in fact she's told, "This station may fall, sorceress, but you will never take our planet." And she says, "Yeah, well, your planet's already lost, I'm afraid, the first of many. I'm simply here to take in the view." Now, that's one of the downsides of Hela within Marvel Comics, historically speaking, because of the nature of her power. Whether you're looking at the old, Tales of Asgard comics as backup features and in the old Thor stories from Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, or you're talking about Hela in a more recent age, the bigger point is that she usually finds herself becoming arrogant, getting caught up in the level of power that she has, whatever that plan for power grab happens to be, and that's what's happening here. While she's kind of getting carried away with all the abilities that she has, her arrogance is more often than not her downfall. But there are times when, despite how arrogant and cocky and reckless a person is, that the level of power they have is so extreme that that power makes up for whatever other weaknesses that they would have. A lack of battle strategy, a lack of understanding with regards to other people's powers, whatever the case happens to be. But that's where you switch back over to the character of Knull. Now, what Knull ends up doing is he tells us, from a nameless planet to a nameless star, it seems our journey into the light becomes more ignominious with each passing moment. Yet despite the inferno that awaits us, we must continue forward at all cost. Our ultimate destiny is locked away within the core of this star, and I now possess the key to open it and the harsh experience to survive it. And we know to whom we owe appreciation for that, don't we? And that's when he says, "The sniveling earthling and venom host Eddie Brock, who exiled me to a fiery, deathless limbo, tearing away my station as the King in Black, only to pathetically surrender my rightful crown, like the worthless insect he truly is. And now that wretched witch has her sights on my throne." Now this is big, because what it establishes is that everything that was going on in Venom War, and everything that Eddie Brock was doing when he was the King in Black, Knull saw it all. He was watching it all unfold, seeing everything taking place. That's significant because now he has information, and information is power. But that's why I also say this may very well tie into the larger Venom story that's being told right now in Marvel Comics. But that's what he says. But Hela will fail too, as did her lapdog Thanos before her, and as did Brock. And it is Brock's pitiful visage I see before me now, children. His weakness and his frailty that drive me forward. It is Brock that I hate most of all, more than Thanos, and more than Hela, more even than the light. And yet it is Brock who will save me, who will save us all. And so he enters into the star, and when that happens, it works as a gateway, because he emerges on the other side, and in looking up, he sees a version of Eddie Brock, who simply says, "Welcome to the Illumina, Knull. It took you long enough," because this is the illuminated version of Eddie Brock from Original Sin digital comic. So let's kind of take a step back from this story for a second, and let's wind back to the King in Black storyline. Do you guys remember how that ended and how it was that Eddie Brock beat Knull in the first place? That Eddie Brock was basically able to attain the light, but it was effectively the Enigma Force, right? Just the force of creation, essentially, but the antithesis to everything that was Knull. When that story ended, Eddie walked away from the light, and Eddie ended up becoming the King in Black, and that's what set him on that path when he ended up meeting all those different variations of himself, right? Tyro and Meridius and so on and so forth, as a kind of FYI, because this will be a little important for what we talk about here in a second. Meridius was kind of like the final stage of Eddie Brock before he would merge with Eventuality. For those of you guys who were a little confused about the run of Venom under Al Ewing, the whole idea behind Meridius, his whole goal was to basically prevent himself from merging with with eventuality and just kind of maintain his level of power, but with all the abilities that he had at his disposal. That was his goal. But ultimately, again, he failed, and it was inevitable that he was going to merge with the eventuality. He was waging against the storm, right? There was nothing he could do to stop it. In a different reality, Earth 624666, Eddie Brock never got rid of the light, and Eddie Brock stayed with it. And so in a lot of ways, this version of Eddie Brock is very similar to Peter Parker during the Spider-Verse story, which was a version of Peter who had kept the Enigma Force after the Acts of Invention storyline in Marvel Comics when Loki united all the villains together. Peter Parker got the Enigma Force in that story. That's the story where he punches the Incredible Hulk into the stratosphere just based on sheer strength alone. Eddie Brock here is very similar to that, right? So I wouldn't go so far as to call him a king in white. That's what the Beyonders are in Marvel Comics. He's kind of his own thing. But what you have here now is what's called the Light Force dimension, that instead of doing what the King in Black, Knull, had done, or even Meridius or anybody like that, who would use the symbiotes, well, technically Meridius hollowed out their sentience, so they were just kind of useless chunks of goo that he can manipulate however you want to. But instead of using the symbiotes in order to imbue himself with greater power, that what he ended up doing was actually using the symbiotes and turning the hive mind into a place that was essentially a meditation area, right? A place to think, a place to process, and a place to understand what was going on with any particular conflict that was going on out there. The important thing to understand is this illuminated Eddie Brock is astronomically powerful, so much so he defeated the Chaos King in his own native reality. Now, it is important to specify that original Sin comic where all this happens is a Marvel digital comic book, so it's designed to be read on an iPhone, so we could cover it, but I don't really know how it would look if we tried. It would just be a bunch of vertical shots is really all it would be. It wouldn't look anything like this, but it is important to understand we're talking about what is potentially a redemption arc for Knull, and Knull possibly becoming a good guy, and certainly, if not a good guy, drastically more powerful than he's ever been in the history of Marvel Comics. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.